Welcome! In this video, we're going to walk through the PyCharm Educational Edition that is targeted at teachers for creating courses based on Python. So the first thing we need to do once we launch PyCharm Educational Edition is to make sure that the plugin for creating courses is enabled. Now by default this is disabled, but all we need to do is search for plugins and click this checkbox over here. Once we do that, we hit OK and PyCharm will prompt us to restart. Once it's restarted, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and click on Create New Project. And here we're going to select Course Creation. Now when we select the course creation, one of the most important aspects is to define the interpreter. That is, what version of Python are we going to be using? It's very important to make sure that the version of Python that we're using is the same one that the students will then use to complete the course. So the next thing we're going to do is provide a location for this course, and we'll call it Basic Intro to Python. And we'll give it a name, Basic Intro to Python, and my name, author information, and a small description, Intro to Python. And we'll go ahead and create the course. Once the wizard has created the course for us, it'll open up our workspace, and this is where we're going to be working with files. Initially, when there isn't a file open, PyCharm will provide us with some useful hints on how to do keyboard navigation. On the left-hand side, we have the actual project. So if we expand that, we can see that it consists of several folders. Now, a course in PyCharm consists of one or more lessons, and then each lesson consists of one or more tasks. So here is the default lesson 1 and default task 1, and we'll examine these files in a moment. There's also a hints folder, which is used to store hints that we might want to provide to students. And some of these hints can be shared among different lessons. That's why it's at the root folder. In addition, we have external libraries, which has information about the interpreter that we have and some other things that we could potentially use. So let's go ahead and create a task. Now this is the task that's going to appear for the student. That is what they need to do. And what we want to do here is remove the default text and write our own task. So we're going to say, in this task, we want you to write a simple hello world. Now before continuing, what I want to do is also rename these lessons. And we don't want to call these lessons 1 and task 1. We want to have something more descriptive. So we're going to rename this, and we're going to call this introduction, and then we're going to rename this task and call this standard output. And this task is basically going to consist of providing some standard output. Now notice that the folder name remains as lesson 1 task 1, but what the students are actually going to see when they're doing this course is the label in the brackets, which is introduction and standard output. Now that we have the actual task description, the next step is to define the actual answer. That is, what is it that we want the students to do? And that's done in the file.oneAnswer. Now again, I want to rename this to something more descriptive. So in this case, I can just invoke the refactoring and call this hello world answer. And then we're going to open up this file. And we can see that what we have to do is provide the solution here. So in my case, the solution would be print and then hello world. Now, when the student executes this, what they're going to see is actually print hello world. So they already have the answer done for them. We want them to, in fact, do something for this exercise. And how we do this is by providing problems, is by giving them problems. And what we want to do here is give them the task to complete the hello world. And the purpose of this task is to provide standard output, which is done with the print command. So what I'm going to do is select this print command and right-click and say Add Answer Placeholder. So now the placeholder text is going to describe to the student what they need to do. So we would say use standard output, and then we can write a hint if we want. So the hint automatically gets assigned an ID, and we would say, for this, you normally use print statement. And we'll hit OK. So now this contains a placeholder. What we can do to see how this actually works is run this. So let's click on this green arrow and hit run hello world answer. And we can see that what comes up is the actual hello world. So now that we've got the task and we also have the answer, the next step is to make sure that what the student does is in fact correct. And for this, we need to create some tests. So let's open up the tests.py file. Now we can see that this test file consists of various parts. There's an import at the top, and then there's the actual test that we have to fill in. And then at the bottom, there is a run common test and then our test. Now the run common test is a series of tests that should be run for each task, which checks to see like the file is not empty, etc. So that's always going to be running. And what we want to do is actually run our test. So we're going to uncomment this so that this call actually takes place. Now, in our case, we have a placeholder, and we can see that we have an array of placeholders. And what we want to do here is make sure that the placeholder contains the word print, because if it does, then we know that the student has successfully completed the task. So in our case, it would be placeholder equals print. If it's passed, then the pass will be executed. If not, a failed. We can optionally provide a message for this fail and say, you need to write print here. We're making it very easy for the student in this first case to just execute this. So just to recap what we've done, we first created a task, which is explained in the task. The next thing we've done is provide the answer in the sense of the text that needs to be written and the placeholders that need to be filled in by the student. And of course, we could add a second placeholder here, and we could put this as another placeholder so they would have to write hello world too. But in this case, we're not going to. And last but not least, and the most important, we've provided the actual test. That is, what needs to occur for this exercise to be completed successfully. So now that we have the test in place, let's go back to our hello world answer, and we're going to run this. And in this case, we're going to actually run the test from hello world answer. So if we execute this, we can see that in fact, everything has passed. We do have the output hello world. And what we can also do is test to see if this fails correctly as well, in the sense that if they don't provide the actual print and they write something else, if it fails correctly. So for instance, instead of print, we can write length, which gives us the length. And then if we run this test again, we can see that in fact the placeholder has failed. With the output, you need to write print here. At this point, we can add a second task. So we'll right click on lesson, select new, and select task. And we'll call this, for instance, standard input. And this will create a task 2 for us with the name standard input, with again the file1.answer task.html and test.py. And we'll repeat the same process and provide a second task here. And as I mentioned before, we can provide as many placeholders as we want for a specific task. We don't need to necessarily just have one placeholder per task. Much the same way as we add tasks, we can also add lessons. By clicking on the root, we can say lesson, and then we can call this advanced, for instance, and hit OK, and that will add a second lesson. And then here we can add one or more tasks, much the same way. Once we have the whole course complete, what we want to do is zip this up and make it available to students. So there's a little icon at the top that basically compresses this zip, creates a course archive. We can click on it, give it a name, give it a location, and hit OK. And this will now export this course to the location provided, and then students can now import this. And of course, we can publish this to GitHub, make it available in any means we like. For a student to import this, all they would have to do is select File, New Project, Educational, and then here, instead of selecting Introduction to Python, they can import more courses. So all they would need to do is select the actual file. So in our case, it would be under PyCharm Projects, Basic Intro, Course.zip, and now we have our second course, which is Basic Intro to Python. And then from here, they can click Create, and once they do that, they now see the course with our standard output, our standard input, and our different files. And from here, we can just write print and hit check, and we can see that we've successfully completed that task. So as you can see, it's quite easy to create courses for students to learn Python. I hope you enjoyed watching and have fun creating Python courses.